So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers tonight, Amanda Foster, Lorna Hibbert and Dr. Biddy Casselden from Northumbria University, who are going to give a talk about their project to amplify Black and Asian voices. Amanda is a content delivery and copyright librarian, Lorna is collections librarian, and Biddy is an assistant professor in information science, and all are from Northumbria University. I know we're excited to start their presentation, so I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm just going to pass over to them and I'll stop sharing my screen so that they can start sharing theirs.
Thank you. Right, so Lorna's in control of the slides. So I'm going to, when I get to the next slide, Lorna, I'll tell you. But thank you very much. And thank you all of those who've come along tonight to listen. We won't introduce ourselves, I suppose, because you've already introduced us, Leanne. So you've saved us that slide. So that's brilliant. So let's move on to the next slide then. So this presentation is all about our experience with our project, which was amplifying Black and Asian voices in the University Library. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell you a little bit about this project, which actually started last year. It's funded by something called the Access and Participation Plan. So the university gets some national funding, which then they divvy up for various projects. We were lucky enough to get some funding from that. So we're going to look at the project that we undertook last academic year, because that's finished now. We're going to look at what we did and what outputs we produced. We're going to consider some of the pros and cons of our project before moving on to talking about what we're doing this year, because we were so lucky with what we were doing that we were actually given some further funding for this year, which is great. So we'll start off by looking at last year's project. So on the screen, you can see that this project was undertaken during the last academic year. You'll see there's a lovely poster which we use to try and attract our student ambassadors. And what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about this project. So we'd wanted to get it off the ground for some time, really, and an opportunity arose where we could apply for funding via the university's Access and Participation Plan. And the bids that were being encouraged were for projects to do with, they were related to narrowing the degree awarding gap for Black students. So I had a chat with Lorna and Amanda, and we agreed that this would be a really good thing to bid for. So we put in our bid, and we were lucky enough to get £3,000 in order to, at that point, the project was called Amplifying Black Voices in the University Library, because that's what the original request for a bid had been about. So we got our £3,000, and what we decided was that we wanted to recruit some student ambassadors who would work with us on mini projects to do with amplifying Black voices in the library. So in terms of what we hope to achieve, we wanted to progress with de-colonising our reading lists, or at least a sample of them. We also wanted to create a reading list which would be a true representation of Black authors across all disciplines, and which would enhance and diversify our collection. And we also wanted to get feedback from the Black students about our library service and what they felt about it. And we were very keen for this project to be student-led. So although we had an idea as to what we wanted to do, we also wanted to hear from students to see what they felt that we should be doing, and then we could come to some sort of happy agreement, if you like, a compromise in terms of what we wanted to do. So the project aim, therefore, was to do three things. We wanted to identify the barriers that Black students faced within the library and the ways that we could improve the accessibility to our library services. We wanted to carry out research into reading list diversity in order to know what we needed to do to improve those reading lists. And also we wanted to develop the library collection further and produce a variety of student-led resources. So that's what we wanted to do. How did we get there? So this is the next slide. So the first thing we needed to do was find some student ambassadors. And we had a chat about this, and what we realized is that actually, rather than doing the usual advertising for the students and then interviewing them and all that sort of thing, we wanted to do it a bit differently. So we decided upon a recruitment event, and this took place in the library. You can see the picture there of me spouting forth. I must have been saying something vaguely funny, because it looks like Amanda's laughing. And we got a really, really good representation from across the university. Many of the students who came along were probably international students as well, because we do have a high number of international students. But it was great. We got representation from all over. And really what we were trying to do with this recruitment event was to work with the students as partners straight away. So actually this event, partly it was about introducing the project, partly it was also about undertaking an activity to explore what students felt about Black voices in the library, so that we could actually get some data straight away. And also from this to then work out what sort of projects they might like to do and what they might like to focus on. So that's what you can see in this picture. We did post-it activities, and we were very lucky in that we managed to get some extra library members to come along. We were very grateful for that, so that actually we could, for each group, and there were about 4 or 5 little groups of students, from what I recall, we could actually, each group had a staff member who was sitting with them, and that was important because, you know, we wanted to have an opportunity to get to know the students as well. So that was the other good thing about doing this recruitment event. And also it allowed them to be able to ask questions in a fairly relaxed way. They were with their peers. That hopefully made them feel a bit more confident than sitting in an interview just 1-to-1 or 1-to-3 if all 3 of us were there interviewing them. So the event, we felt, we had about 25 attendees in the end. We felt it was very successful. The post-it activity was really interesting. It started the conversation going, and also identified what the students, you know, we had this idea as to what we thought was important, but it showed us what the students thought was important as well, and then allowed us to tweak and amend what perhaps we'd originally come up with. So following this, we said to the students, well, if you're still interested, because this was, I'm trying to think, it was about 1.5 hours, 2 hours, I can't remember how long the event was, round about that, wasn't it? And yeah. I remember, you know, obviously then we said, right, if you're still interested, complete a form. So it was a bit formalised at the end, so they completed a very simple pro forma, which just detailed who they were, and also they provided some indication as to what they wanted to do project-wise, because we wanted to make sure that we could match them to that. And also it helped us when we were thinking about, you know, trying to get a balance of students as well. We wanted not just to focus on one department, but to try and get a balance of students from around the university. So I think this was a really good event because it started that conversation amongst the Black students. And I say started a conversation amongst the students as well. I put 2 quotes up there. I do apologise for the busy nature of the slide. We were going to have transitions, but then we realised because one person was going to be using the controlling the slides, it would just get a bit chaotic. So you can see here we've got these lovely green quotes. And I think these came from feedback that we got from the students following the event. And it's interesting what they say in the bottom left-hand corner, that it was engaging to converse with fellow students. It served as an eye-opener, helping me to understand various perspectives and issues. So actually, it's really interesting because we make this assumption, you know, I mean, us as three white women, you know, talking about this project, you know, it's sometimes you feel a bit of a sort of, you know, why am I doing this? You know, should I be doing this? And we could have all sorts of discussions over that. But it was really interesting how the Black students themselves were saying that they actually found it quite illuminating, some of the issues that were coming out. We sort of have this expectation that everybody's coming from the same situation, but actually they all had different experiences, they all had different viewpoints. So I think that was really, really nice to hear. And I think they enjoyed the fact that they were able to express themselves. And that was the start of the project, you know, that actually, even though not all these people were lucky enough to become a student ambassador, they all had a say, they all had an input into that project. So as a culmination of this, we recruited 6 students, and these 6 students then worked in pairs. So we had 3 separate little mini groups, if you like, working with myself, with Lorna and Amanda as a member of staff with each of those 3 groups of students. So next slide, please. So what did we do? So this again is going back to last year. So there were, well, I think there were 3. So there were 3 projects, but there were actually 4 projects, which is why you can see 4 bits of information on this slide. Although I think 2 of them were actually formed part of the same project, if you like, and you'll see what we mean as we talk through this. And these projects really came about, as I say, partly from our own awareness and what we wanted to do, but also very strongly from the recruitment event. You know, it was quite reassuring actually to see that a lot of the things that they were discussing were things that we had noticed too. And so they came from the recruitment event as well. They came from the student ideas, they came from our interests. Also, we wanted to make sure it met service requirements, which sounds a bit boring, but obviously the whole idea of this is also about improving the service and making sure that, you know, we're doing something that actually the university wants us to do. And also making sure, as I said before, we wanted to motivate the students. Obviously, the money might have been a little bit of a motivator, but to feel passionate about what they were doing and wanting to take part. So we wanted very much to make sure that these activities really fitted the students that we chose, which I think we did a good job of. So now we're going to move on, look at the projects a little bit. We're going to start with the project that I was involved with. So the 2 students you see here were actually both students from the Department of Computer and Information Sciences, both master's students, one more from the computing area, one from the information sciences area. And they worked with me on reading list analysis. So this part of the project was really about looking at the diversity of our departmental reading lists. So it was focused on the Computer and Information Sciences department. And so what they did is they took a sample of modules, a sample of reading lists, and they analysed them using a pre-existing diversity audit tool, which was the Manchester Met reading list tool. And that essentially is a spreadsheet that you can use. So they sort of used the data, they pulled it all out, they put it into the spreadsheets, they examined the reading list. They also did some focus groups with students in the department, and they also spoke to a small number of teaching staff. And this was really just to get a flavour of what was going on. And much as we expected, or I expected, interestingly, and the terminology you see here was what was being used from the Manchester Met tool. So apologies if you don't like the terminology, but they found that actually only 13% of authors were from Black and Asian minority ethnic groups. They also looked at female authors because we decided, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, we might as well. And it's interesting that less than a quarter of the authors were female on these reading lists. The majority of the publishers were from the global north or Western Europe and were mainstream publishers. So these were things that we sort of hoped we wouldn't find, but we did. So I don't think there was anything shocking that we didn't realise, but it was useful to have this if you like, sort of documented, because then you know that you could do something about it. You know, once you have that information, you need to do something. So that was the analysis. And on the next slide, which hopefully Lorna will move on to, thank you, it just shows you some of the sort of the graphical information that we got, which again came from that tool, and it just provided a really sort of clear indication that things weren't as they should be, things weren't great. So there were challenges with this activity. So it actually took a long time for the students to process all this information, and it was quite easy but boring sort of processing that they were doing. But the benefits were that we could share this with the wider department. We also shared it through our webpage on the library so that others could see what we had discovered. And there were a number of things we realised as a result of this. One of the students, who was a computing student, was quite interested in knowing whether they could produce something else that might better fit our university as a tool. Unfortunately, they didn't have the time, so that never happened. But certainly that's something which, you know, is at the back of my mind that we could perhaps do at some point. But we also need to examine some of the other departments. We also felt, as a result of this, that we need to think about how we can support academic staff to create more diverse reading lists, and what information that might, you know, what that information might look like. So that just gives you a little flavour of that first project. And now I'm going to pass on to Lorna, who's going to tell us about the other bit of the project, which was the library survey.
Thanks, Biddy. Sorry, my mouse is sticking. Hopefully you can see my slide now. Yes, so my part of the project, so I managed two of the students who you can see their lovely photos on the slide there, and they worked on a short survey with the aim of finding out more about Black students' experiences of using the library. So experiences of using the library in the broader sense, so like the physical space, the online environment, you know, everything, you know, to do with the university library. So it was sort of one of the more challenging, I would say, elements of the project, because it took the students a long time to kind of formulate their questions and sort of go through that process. And again, this is part of doing, you know, a project like this, working with students. So, you know, we were working with master's students, but, you know, they hadn't necessarily written, you know, like a questionnaire or done a survey before. So they had to kind of go through, you know, that process of, you know, working quite closely with me to make sure that they got the questions right. So that took a little bit of time. And then they also had a few little technical problems, again, sort of using the online survey software as well. So that kind of delayed the survey a little bit. So they launched that in May last year. So for those of you unfamiliar with sort of like the academic year calendar, like May time is often when, you know, students are doing exams. So in terms of the on-campus, like physical, you know, students being physically on campus, there was actually less undergraduates, I would say, on campus and more postgraduates around. So in terms of them promoting the survey and trying to get engagement, yeah, that was quite challenging. And obviously we did promote it, not just physically, it was promoted online, and hopefully you can see a little bit, there's a little image there which had the poster that they used to promote it with the QR code that took you directly to the survey. But to be fair, considering it was like the peak assessment period, they got 79 responses, which I know probably doesn't sound that many when you've got like thousands of students. But if you've ever done this kind of thing before, that I think that's pretty good. Considering it was a very focused survey as well, so it wasn't just like any student, you know, we weren't just aiming this at any student. So and they did a few in-person events where, so for those of you unfamiliar with Northumbria University Library, the library is kind of located, and part of the building that we're sort of part of is something called Student Central. So you kind of walk into Student Central, and then you've got like you've got a help desk and some space there before you get to the library barriers. So they kind of put a table in there, and they wandered around, you know, not disturbing people, but kind of saying, hi, you know, are you interested in, you know, taking part? And they also based themselves at the table and handed out sweets and to try and get interest. And they actually upped the response rate by over half doing that. So that was really useful. So yes, the outcomes of the survey. So I'm not going to read everything out, but they did write a report, and the report is available on our project website, which we will put in the chat once once we finish clicking through our slides and finish our presentation. I'll put that in the chat. But I just wanted to read out a few of the recommendations. So the first one is that they thought that the library and the university should increase representation. So to hire more Black staff members to ensure diversity and representation. And this actually linked back to the recruitment event. So when we held the recruitment event that Biddy described, and we did an activity on tables, and it actually came up quite a lot that the students had already observed that they didn't think they were represented in the library staff. So yeah, our library staff, you know, it is mainly, yeah, white people who I would identify as white. So that was something they mentioned. They also mentioned about promoting Black leaders. So they thought we could do a campaign where we displayed banners and posters across the library and the university that supported and showcased Black leaders. And that obviously would help create a more inclusive visual environment. And finally, they also identified that we could curate diverse reading lists. So again, it links back to Biddy's area of the project. And yeah, to make the reading list more diverse, to promote Black history and diverse perspectives. So some of the things I did think, well, I could at least try and address. So I did get in contact with our Human Resources Department, and we have equality, diversity and inclusion managers within Human Resources. So I thought they would be good people to start off with having a conversation with. So I did tell them about the to find out more what they were doing with increasing representation and inclusive recruitment. And so that is part of our race equality charter. So it is being looked at by the university. But for those of you, obviously, you know, in the library profession, you'll know that it is an issue across the library profession, I would say, that maybe we aren't so diverse, and particularly in the Northeast as well. So it is a challenge, and the university is trying to address it across the professional support services as well. And something I've tried to do is, when I'm thinking about the recruitment for jobs, you know, maybe within my team, is just think about how I can make my processes more inclusive, which I have done to a point. But I think the challenge we have often is where we can advertise the jobs in the first place to be more inclusive. So anyway, if anyone's got any ideas, we can maybe explore that at the end, or put ideas in the chat, because that's something I'm really interested in exploring. And also the recommendation they made about promoting Black leaders, again, that's been fed back to Human Resources, because I felt that needed to sit with them. We don't have any Black leaders in the library, so it's not like I could go off and create a campaign. I felt like, you know, there are a lot of academic staff possibly in a leadership position, and it is possible they might be wanting to do that. So again, I fed that back, and it was, you know, it was appreciated, and I've sort of left that with them. And then finally, obviously, the curating the diverse reading list. Biddy's explained, you know, what we've done so far on that, and so we are aware. But it was interesting that that came up on the survey. So the students who filled in the survey weren't necessarily aware that we were looking into that on the project. So that was quite interesting. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over to Amanda to tell you a little bit more about her area of the project.
Thanks, Lorna. Thank you. I'll move along so you can hear me. So yeah, going back to the recruitment event, I think it was clear that two of the students I spoke to, this was Casey and Joanna, they had a really quite extensive knowledge of Black authors, and they were very keen to help us develop the collection in the library. They had great ideas for a reading list where Black authors could be represented across all disciplines, such as sport, art, music, film and politics. And I think they also had skills using podcasts and developing podcasts and also web pages, and they were keen to sort of include these within the reading lists. They came onto campus once they'd been appointed, and we did some training with them, and they were really quite quick to use our reading list service, which is Talis Aspire. And we were really impressed with how they developed the list themselves, how they structured the list, and really developed something that was quite innovative. They included both academic and recreational texts, and the structure and everything was just really, really impressive. If you would like to take a look at the list, it is publicly available, and we have got a link to it there on the screen. And also we did take the opportunity to use some books from the list in the spotlight display in the library, which you can also see there. So in terms of the podcast, as mentioned, the same two students, so Casey and Joanna, they were very keen on developing the podcast idea. We did, and Lorna will talk a bit more later about some of the issues we faced, and one was certainly the podcast in terms of technology and the studio, and there was a flood and all kinds, wasn't there? So it was quite challenging. But yes, once we found a studio and we had many conversations about where to host the podcast and how to book the studio, it worked really well, I think, despite our initial fears. In terms of content, so the students came up with the content themselves, and they both had experience and they both came across really, really well. They used the first podcast to introduce the project and what they planned to do. And then in later instalments, they moved on to interviewing other Black students and also other people that they'd been inspired by. They interview their fellow student Beko in the third podcast, a student from Zimbabwe originally. And he gives a great insight into his childhood and his move to the UK. It was really interesting listening to him talk about Newcastle, and particularly the Newcastle fashion. He was quite impressed by that. And in the fourth podcast, they interview their friend Aluchi, who's from Nigerian heritage and who went to Oxford University. And this one is really, really interesting, as she talks a lot about her experiences in Oxford and how she found her religion quite restrictive. And we are hoping that we are going to be able to play a section of the podcast for you. This is the fourth one, where they interview Aluchi.
Yeah, so bear with me. I'm going to have a go. We have tried this out, but
it didn't work very well.
Yeah, and I'm just going to move it along. Bear with me, sorry. I'm going to move it along, and I'm just going to play a very short part. So apologies if you can't hear this very well, but you will be able to listen to it at your own leisure once we've put the link in. So yeah, sorry, I'm just finding the right bit.
About yourself and all that, like.
No, I think I especially remember, like, when I came back to Newcastle, I was like, I have to find Black friends, especially Black women as well. And I have met, like, the most amazing Black women. And I'm not gonna lie, they have definitely helped me on that journey of, like, self-acceptance and stuff like that. Because,
this is what I was gonna ask you.
Because, especially when you're with Black people, there's a level of understanding. So, like, when you talk about experiences and you don't have the word for it, they will immediately understand what you're talking about. So I'll have experiences that I like, even like microaggressions. Like microaggressions hasn't been a word for like ages.
Yeah.
However, when you talk about like the little pieces of racism experienced, and you talk about that with a Black person, they will understand where you're coming from. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's really beautiful that you can, like, I'm able to communicate, almost like communicate non-verbally my experiences with them, when I don't have the words to describe what I've experienced. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So do you feel like you have like a strong Black community here in Newcastle? Because I know probably in London you used to have more, but in here, like, did you feel like any difference? You feel like you were supported by the community as well? Because one thing that I know is, like, every time I go back to home, like Africa in Angola, I don't feel very supported, because they kind of give me like the bombastic side. Like, what's this light skin doing here? You know what I mean? So sometimes I don't feel supported. But what was your experience with that? Do you feel like you were supported here in Newcastle?
Yeah, I think I've also found like a really cool creative community as well. Really amazing people. But yeah, no, I know, I meet people really weirdly. Like, I'll see someone on the street and think they look cool, and I'm running. I'm like, excuse me, miss. I just want to say you look so beautiful.
Nice of you.
And honestly, I've met a lot of my friends that way. Yeah, a lot of the people that are my friends today, I like met them in bars and went up to them, and I was like, you actually look amazing.
Right, sorry, it's the only way I have to go to the next slide to cut it off. That was one of the technical issues. Sorry, I hope that gives you a little bit of flavour. Obviously, each podcast is different, and they are long, but you know, they're really, I can honestly, yeah, they're really interested in the conversations they have, and obviously they are talking about yeah, their own personal experiences. So each podcast is different, but yes, hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour for that part of the project. So yes, I'm just going to summarise sort of some of the benefits of the project. And this, again, you might be interested in this if you want to do this sort of work yourself, and you know, because some of the things that are good about doing these kind of projects are probably common. So yeah, obviously it was mutually beneficial. So you know, it was great for us, it was great for the students, and we got a lot done. So, you know, we're really proud of what we achieved, because doing something like this for the first time, it is a bit nerve-wracking, and you're not quite sure, and you meet the students and you think, oh, you know, are they okay? And you also feel there's a duty of care involved as well, you know, about supporting the students. So yes, anyway, it was great. We're really pleased with what we achieved, and we got a lot of fresh insight into the library service as well, through every part of the project, and not just the survey, which was obviously asking for feedback about the library. And it also enhanced the relationships between the library academic staff, so between us and Biddy, and vice versa, between obviously ourselves and the students. And I think sometimes the library, you know, a university library can feel detached from sort of the rest of the faculty. And yes, we work closely with academics, so Biddy is obviously, you know, very pro-library, but sometimes it is challenging to sort of, you know, get across what we're about and what we're doing. So that was great. And for the students, obviously, there were lots of benefits. So there are some quotes on the screen there, but I'll just kind of try and summarise that for you. So yeah, they identified that the peer support element was great, their skills development, their employability enhancement, social connections, and obviously the financial benefits, because we were paying, you know, the students were paid, and that's, you know, the funding for the project meant that we could pay them. So obviously, you know, hard times for students. So yeah, it was great that we could pay them. So yeah, I'm just going to read out one of the quotes for you. So, being a student ambassador has helped me gain a broader perspective on students' experiences and has been instrumental in developing my networking skills. Through interactions with students, academic staff and library staff, I have enhanced my interpersonal abilities and strengthened my time management and organisational skills. So it was great to hear that, because, you know, we were very much focused on making sure they were okay, making sure obviously we had some outputs, but obviously, you know, they were telling us of all the skills that they were gaining by, you know, being part of this project. So although this slide's called cons, obviously, that sounds quite negative, but essentially, in a nutshell, you know, it's just about the things that we maybe found more challenging. So yes, doing a project like this, when you're trying to sort of balance this alongside your day job, you know, the rest of the business of you as usual kind of work, it is challenging. And, you know, there's often too much to do in too little time. So it can be a little bit frustrating, because you don't necessarily achieve everything that you want to do. And obviously it is a finite project. It takes a lot of time to sort of get started, get the students started. And then suddenly, you know, we're in May now, sorry, March now even, I'm ahead of myself. And, you know, suddenly you're like, oh, we haven't got that long left, you know, and the project's funded until the end of June. So it was the same last year as well. So yeah, and we actually had to apply for more money last year, because we realised, yeah, they were doing great. They were doing loads of work, but we were kind of thinking, oh, goodness, we're running out of money. So we were lucky to get some more money last year. And also the students, they were finding their challenges. Again, some of them are on the slide there that they had identified. But, you know, students today, they're not just coming here and you know, and studying. They often have other jobs. So as well as this job that they were doing as a student ambassador, some of them had other jobs, and some of them had other commitments or, you know, caring responsibilities, which we didn't necessarily know from the outset. But obviously later on the project, yeah, we found out some of the students had families, you know, multiple children or a baby, or, you know, so yeah, there's lots going on in their lives. So I think if you ever undertake this kind of work, you have to acknowledge that and also be aware that students can therefore opt out at any time, you know, because they're stressed with their studies or that they've got these other commitments. So yeah, you have to bear that in mind all the time. As much as you're excited by the project and you really want to achieve a lot, yeah, you've always got to have that in kind of the back of your mind that, you know, they may opt out at some point. And we also had some challenges to do with the system. So again, this is more like the bureaucracy, which some of you may be familiar with, regardless of where you work, in that there are systems that you have to use, and the way that the students were paid, there was a bit of a problem with that, which has actually happened again, sadly, on the new system we've got this year. It's happened again. So yes, that can be a bit uncomfortable. You know, they've done loads of work and they didn't get paid for a little while. And yes, the final point on the slide there is that, you know, amplifying Black voices in the library takes time. You know, it isn't something that you can do overnight. So as much as we might feel frustrated about what we're able to achieve, you can't just achieve it in 1 year, 2 years, maybe 3 years. So yeah, that's something to be aware of also. So a bit about this year's project. We're not talking too much about this year's project because we're kind of just in it now, and we haven't obviously got to the end of it, but I'll just like to tell you a few things about what we are hoping to achieve this year. So Biddy's area of the project, again, is still looking at the diversity of reading lists, but the students this year are hoping to do some benchmarking, so looking at what other universities are doing. We did obviously looked at what Manchester Metropolitan University had been doing, but we've tried to broaden that out this year, and also talking to academic staff within the university. So hopefully they'll be able to interview staff, maybe do some focus groups, with the ultimate aim of producing something like a wireframe. And if you're not familiar with that term, we hope to kind of almost mock up a web page or a website so that we know what it might look like when there are resources to go on such a website. And we know we can't create all of these resources ourselves, and that's why it's going to be important to talk to academic staff across the university, because I think there are lots of pockets of research going on to do with particularly de-colonising the curriculum, which kind of goes beyond what we're doing. We're looking at the reading list, but obviously it's not just the reading list, it's the curriculum itself. So yeah, that's one part. And Amanda's part of the project is to develop an Asian Voices reading list. So we have actually managed to do that, but there's a few tweaks we need to make with that just to make it okay, and then we'll be making that available on the website. And also to create some more spotlight displays. So some of these we've actually managed to achieve. So we did do a spotlight display in the library where we were focusing on Chinese New Year and also Black History Month. So they were led by the students, but supported by our colleagues in the library, some of whom are, I think, in the audience today. So we would like to thank our colleagues, particularly Amy and Sean, for helping us with those spotlight displays. So again, continuing with the podcast series. So again, that's Amanda's area of the project. Casey, one of our students last year, has continued this year, which is great because she already has that skill set and she very much knows what this project is about. So she's got some great ideas and we're going to hopefully weave in a bit more library related themes. So if you do go off and listen to the podcasts, they're great, and it's very much about the students talking about their experiences, but they're not necessarily relating back to the library as much as we would like. And we are aware we want to promote what we're doing and get students using our services, to help with their studies. So yeah, they're hoping to interview some students again as well on their podcast. And finally, my area of the project is going to be completely different this year, and I'm hoping to create some, or rather the students will be creating a series of videos where they will be interviewing students with the aim of celebrating cultural diversity. So I can't say much more at the moment, but there'll be short videos, and it's sort of inspired by the human library concept. So if you want to look into the human library concept more, there is a website, and also there's some great resources at Huddersfield University. There's a toolkit there, and Hull University as well. They worked in partnership, so there's some great videos on there. So if you're interested in the concept of the human library or the living library, so we're doing something inspired by that, but it's not exactly the same. But yeah, the students are going to interview other students, and they're going to talk about their experiences, their heritage, how they celebrate their heritage, and so on, and also their experiences of the library as well. So we're quite excited about that. So watch this space. Hopefully we will get something on the website before the end of the year. And just back to Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to touch further on the spotlight displays, because I think, like Lorna said, there were a few things that we kind of reflected on last year, and I think one of them that I felt was that we hadn't sort of utilised the display sort of visual aspect very well last year. So I think we only did one display, which was based on the reading list that KC came up with. But yeah, so this year we're obviously looking at doing more displays. We've booked in the display area quite a few times. Like Lorna said, we've had help from our colleagues. I was aware that somebody in my team, Amy, who's listening, I know, had experience in this area, and Amy was keen to get involved and designed the lovely posters, so that was great. So this is Shannon, who's working on the project this year, and this is obviously the Chinese New Year display, which was really good. It was really, really good. And we've also booked in time for Asian art, which we're doing this month, Black cinema, which KC was keen to focus on, and I think in particular, it's obviously quite recently films such as One Love and the recent adaptation of The Colour Purple. I think KC was quite keen to explore books that have been turned into films, so I'm quite looking forward to that one. And yeah, as Lorna mentioned, the Asian Voices reading list has been developed, so we also have that now that we can use in terms of the display, which is really, really good. So yeah, we're hoping that that gives us a bit more scope for sort of a visual side of things. And yeah, Lorna mentioned earlier the website, which is a work in progress, because we developed it initially as part of the project last year, but obviously we know that we need to update it for the project this year. So we're kind of looking at how we do that and add in the Asian side of things, and everything that Shannon's working on, but also keep what we had last year and not sort of get rid of that. But please do have a look, because it really is very useful, and it's kind of where we're linking everything from. So every part of the project is on there.
Yeah, we'll put that in the chat when we're finished as well, so people can have a look at that.
And that's everything from us. Do you have any questions? And thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks Biddy and Lorna and Amanda. That was great. We do have quite a few questions in the chat, which I'll read them out, and then you can obviously answer them. So at the beginning, Elaine asked, how do you determine if the author is from a BAME group? So when when in Biddy's part of the project, when the students were kind of analysing the lists, how do you make that determination based on the information you've got?
Yeah, I think that's why it took so long. Because obviously the students had to do quite a bit of research because yeah, it's really difficult sometimes. I mean, obviously, from some of the research they did, they were able to determine that, but some bits they couldn't, in which case they couldn't add that data. So it's not easy, and obviously we can't make assumptions, and I think that's part of the challenge, which is probably why. So I think the tool was interesting in that it illustrated something, but I think equally more important is trying to, particularly where, for example, reading lists play quite a crucial role in terms of the collection of the library, and what the library stocks, to make sure that academic staff who obviously create those reading lists are well informed. And I guess that's why what we've moved to this year is to think about, you know, what content, what information do academic staff need to enable them to make decisions that amplify those sorts of voices more, and perhaps understand that there are different resources that they can use and different publishers they can use, you know, which, to be honest, you know, having sat on both sides, when you're creating your reading list, you're very much, I will admit, a product of what you've read. And also you're working usually quite quickly, getting a request for reading lists and having to turn it around very quickly. And so I think the more information we can give, the more support we can give, that's easily digestible and that academics are actually going to look at, because that's the other challenge you've got, then I think that will help to sort of support people to understand why actually it's a good idea, and that hopefully they find some really interesting voices out there. But it's not an easy task at all. So I hope that answers the question, sort of.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I can imagine there's not an easy answer to that. Sharon asked in the chat, do you know what proportion of Northumbria student population is, you know, within that BAME and demographic?
Well, I did a bit of research because I saw it flash up on the chat when Lorna or Amanda was talking. So we do actually have an EDI annual report at Northumbria, which I can put in the chat so you can have a look at it. I'll do that after I've talked. And I had a quick read of it because, to be honest, I didn't know off the top of my head. And I think the interesting thing to bear in mind, you know, we've always had, I've been aware of this, in that Newcastle and Northumbria University particularly takes a large number of its students, particularly of the undergraduate students, from the region, from the northeast region. We have very loyal, often young people who want to stay in the northeast region. And as you will be aware, the northeast region doesn't necessarily have a very high sort of percentage of ethnic minority people, and therefore, interestingly, the actual, so this is from 2022, it stated in the report 1.4% of the UK undergraduate population were Black compared to 8% nationally, which doesn't surprise me. Interestingly, I would argue, having taught lots and lots of our master's students, and we get a large number of international students, so although they're not home Black students, we do get much higher numbers of Black and Asian students at master's level. And interestingly, our staff as well has increased slightly. So now, again, they've used the term Black and Asian minority ethnic, and they are stating that in 2022, which the latest report was 12.8, which was up from 12.4. And that doesn't surprise me either, because we do have quite an internationally based staff, and you know, staff coming from all over the world to work at Northumbria. But I think actually that's not the point, because I think that it doesn't matter what the quota, you know, the percentage was, it's important. And I guess also because it is such small numbers, particularly amongst the undergrad population, that we want to make our Black and Asian students feel part of our community. And actually part of what this whole project was about was making people feel they belong at Northumbria and they're part of Northumbria. So personally, I feel that it's really important whether we had a high number of Black and Asian students or not. I think it's vital that we do our bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I'll share the link as well in the chat.
That would be great. Benjamin asked, how do you balance ensuring that Black voices are brought to the front with not shifting all the responsibility for doing that work onto them? And then hopefully that, he says, hopefully that makes the question make sense. Yeah.
Do you want to answer, Lorna or Amanda? I feel I'm answering them all, so I'm going to give you a chance.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Sure. How do you balance ensuring that Black voices are brought to the front with not shifting all the responsibility for the decolonising onto them?
Yeah, I mean, this is where all of the research that's going on in the university, and I think we're very conscious of that. We do have a decolonising network in the university, and there's a team site, as there is with everything these days. So yes, I think what we want to do is, and certainly with Biddy's part of the project, is try to pull all of this stuff together. So there's lots of research projects going on, and academic staff particularly who are doing maybe research in their own particularly subject discipline to do with decolonising. But yeah, certainly I think, yeah, the responsibility lies with the university and not the students. And that's another thing about doing projects like this, is that, and as I mentioned, you can't just expect students to be doing this work all the time and sort of opting into these sorts of projects. So you have to think of other ways, other ways to do this. So yes, I think there is a lot of work to be done still. But yes, I would like to think we can try and at least encourage the university to pull all of this work together. And we're also very aware that we're doing this project, and then there's the access and participation plan, which funds many projects. And we don't necessarily know the detail of all of these other projects. And also there are other people, probably they're not necessarily doing what we're doing, but they may be working towards the same aim as part of that. So again, that's something I think this year and certainly next year we would like to address as well, because I think in order to really achieve what we want to achieve doing this sort of work, we can't do it on our own. So yeah, it can't just be all of this piecemeal kind of little, tiny little projects happening. It needs to be all brought together. I think. Sorry, I've rambled on a bit. I hope that answers.
Some progress being made though, I think, this year, can't we? Because we are thinking of ways that we can kind of make the project more visible, but we have had more people contact us from elsewhere in the university who weren't aware of the project this year, but last year, but are this year. So yeah, I think we can definitely see that has helped.
Yeah, sorry, that's something I did forget to mention in my part of the presentation, is that we have made many connections, much more so this year, with other members of staff across the university, academic staff, and also
like the TEL team.
Yeah, sort of other support services in the university. And whilst, yeah, it feels like everyone's doing their own thing, but at least they are much more aware about what we're doing, and they're starting. Even this week, I've had 2 emails which I haven't fully digested, but they are in relation to this project. So yeah, but yes, I hope that answers it in a rambling way.
No, I think so. And Susie's put into the chat, partnership working is so important. So yeah, I think that's definitely answered that one. Barry asked, but I think you might have partly answered this question in later parts of your presentation. He asked, did the podcast just last for the duration of the project, or is it ongoing? But I think you did touch on that, the project, the podcast will kind of continue.
But yeah, I mean, obviously one of the students is the one who's continuing, KC. The other one was a final year student last year, Joanna, so she isn't part of it this year. It's a different student. So there was some conversations about having to change it this year, because obviously we wanted to, give Joanna the bit that she deserved in terms of last year. And obviously Shannon is working on the Asian Voices side of things. So it's changed, but yes, it's ongoing. And we're hoping that it will be ongoing next year as well.
Oh, that's great. There's been a few comments in the chat about people looking forward to listening to it. So
thank you.
That's good. Andrew asked, he just said, he commented, I love this work. He wanted to ask about the evaluation of the project, and it says in the APP that this includes looking at student attainment. Could you say a bit about how this might be done? Because he's found it challenging in inclusive reading list work, but he also says it's a complex question and he's happy to get in touch with it offline because it might require
I
more
think,
thinking
like I've said sort of in my previous response, it is complex, and I've asked these questions. So the team that actually are responsible for sort of dealing with this fund, the Access and Participation Plan, they know that it's complicated, and I've often said, well, we're doing this, but there's more we could do. And also how much, you know, because of data protection as well, there's certain things we can do when students opt in, you know, to give their details when they join the university, because I think there is more that we want to do to explore the attainment, and particularly in relation to the library, the read and listen, also the skills support that we provide. But we would have to do that in a different way. So yes, I think please contact us offline, especially if you've tried things or thought about that. But certainly elsewhere in the university, again, another email that I just got today and I haven't fully read, but it was from an academic member of staff who is very much looking into the degree awarding gap within his subject area. I think it's the business school. And he's wanting to talk to us about our project because he's wanting to involve Black students to actually talk to other Black students and very much in signposting what's available for students to help with, the degree awarding gap in its broader sense. So yes, I don't have a full answer for that because I think it is complicated, but I think again it comes back to bringing all of these things together as well and not just going off and doing our own thing.
I just want to add the one thing we did do though, which we were able to control. We did a very fairly straightforward survey, which is how we got those quotes towards the end of the project, which was really important. So that was for the student ambassadors, and it was mainly a sort of qualitative comments-based survey, and that was important for us because, you know, sometimes, and we anonymized it, although you could argue with six students, you know, can it be truly anonymous? But it was useful to get that feedback, because then we could see what difference it actually made to them. I know it might not have talked about their attainment gaps or anything like that, but just in terms of those things like feeling part of something and feeling that they'd made a difference and feeling they belonged and better understanding the services. You know, I think that side of it you can do, you know, quite easily. And actually that was really valuable. It was sort of a bit of an afterthought for us, wasn't it? Or it was for me anyway. I sort of said, oh, I should do that. And we did that. And then it was like, okay, what a good idea. Yes, that was really useful to do. You know, so that was quite nice, I think.
Great, thank you. And then Charlotte has asked, did you get any feedback about Black British voices versus US voices?
In terms of where from? Sorry.
It doesn't say. Feel free to, Charlotte, feel free to expand on your question, but
Yes.
I think maybe, you know, different, I guess maybe different perspectives on different voices.
Yeah, we had feedback
all British,
from...
were they?
No, but in terms of the reading list that the students produced, definitely had a mixture of Black and US voices on it. But
from the 6 students who worked on the project, they weren't all British students, were they?
No, some of them were international students.
So we did get, but no, not particularly, no. But yeah, they weren't all Black British students.
Yeah.
No. And that's I think that's also very much particular of Northumbria a little bit, in that, you know, as I said before, I think a lot of our, although we do have some Black British students, it's not perhaps as big numbers as in some other parts of the country. I think the Northeast is you know, I don't know why, but we tend not to have as many, but we do have a good number of Black students from elsewhere, you know, certainly internationally, which again, you know, it's important to make sure that all those different needs are sort of catered to, if you like.
But certainly one thing to note is that the survey that the students did, again, because of the time of year that they did it, and like I said, because a lot of the undergrad students were just too busy, I mean, they wouldn't have necessarily engaged with it. So most of the students who filled out, those 79 students, a high percentage were postgrad students, and therefore probably, although I don't think we asked that question, were international students. So yeah, in terms of finding out more about Black British students, that's definitely still something to do. And also that links back to the degree awarding gap, because the degree awarding gap is really about undergraduate degree awarding gap, not postgraduate. So that's something
I've just seen in the chat, Charlotte's added something. So she was saying she had feedback from their students that they wanted to see themselves represented as Black British students as opposed to Black US voices, which dominate web-based reading lists. That's a really interesting point. And yeah, it's one that I can imagine that, yes, there is a, and I certainly, although the reading list analysis that the students did was probably not that, it didn't go into that level of detail. And that was partly because of the, you know, the tool they were using. But I can see how, and certainly, you know, with things like not just reading this, but thinking about AI and Google and the, you know, the sort of the algorithmic bias that might come back. It's certainly a really important topic, but it wasn't something that we particularly focused on in the reading list bit, if that makes sense.
I think we were aware of it, weren't we? I mean, we did different, obviously we knew with Black History Month that there was, you know, different, there was a US one and a UK one, and we did separate them out in terms of the displays and the reading list.
Well, that's great. I think we've covered all of the questions. So, you know, thank you everyone for submitting questions. That's great. And, you know, Lorna, Amanda and Biddy, thank you for sharing your time with us this evening and sharing what you've done about your project. I think everyone's found it really thought-provoking and certainly have things to take away. And I appreciate that the links are in the chat that you've been putting in, because there's definitely a lot to go away and read and investigate and have a closer look at. So, you know, thanks again for doing that. And we will be, we have recorded this, so we will be sharing the recording once we've had a chance to edit the AGM out, because probably nobody needs to see that again. And we will, Lorna and Amanda and Biddy have said we can share the slides as well, you know, once they'll sort them out, and then we'll circulate those things. And if there's any links that we need to put in a follow-up email, we can do as well, just to make sure everybody's got everything.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone has got any further questions, you know, after you've maybe looked at some of the stuff, then we're more than happy, just contact us. And we'll probably, be asking you questions as well off the back of that. So yeah,
definitely.
Brilliant.
Thank you again for inviting us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We enjoyed sharing our experiences with you also. Thank you.
No, that's great, thanks. And so we're coming to the end of it now, and as ever, we want your feedback about this session and any things that you think that the committee can do in the future. If there's any kind of particular events you'd like us to run, or anything that you think is going on in the region that we should know about, then please feel free to do that. Barry will put a evaluation link form in the chat if he hasn't already.